Hello and welcome to week 4. Can you believe we are already halfway through this class? So if you are feeling a little discouraged, I hope that knowing that you are halfway through will be encouragement for this week. So you all are doing a great job of keeping up with your assignments, and the assignments this week were done, or this past week were done really well. So I hope the feedback was helpful to you, and I look forward to continuing to learn and grow from each of you and your experiences and your perspectives on the information that we are covering. Before I jump too far into this week's assignment, I'd like to start with a verse of the week. And so this verse comes from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. And it is faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. So this verse stood out to me this week because I rely heavily on faith every day, every week, every month, all throughout the year. Um, there's so many things that happen on a day-to-day basis that if I didn't have strong faith in my life, I would be much more angry, much more frustrated. Um, I think I would not have as much happiness, peace, and joy in my heart. And so I share that with you because I hope that as you are facing things that you're just not sure why it's happening, um, feeling a little beat up from God because things aren't on track as you would have liked them to be. But just know that faith is the size of a mustard seed, or having faith the size of a mustard seed can still move mountains just the same. So even if you're struggling right now and you have uncertainty in your commitment and dedication and love for God and his purpose that he has for you, just know, just even a little bit of faith can take you a long way. And if you just give it all to God and say, I don't know, I'm confused, I'm not sure, but I put my faith in you and I know that you will see me through. I guarantee in the end, you will see there's so much greatness that comes in having faith in God. And when you do make it through whatever that setback, challenge, adversity, when you make it through, it is so rewarding to know that you had that love and support and faith in God. And so I hope this is something that is encouraging to each and every one of you, and you can use your small mustard seed of faith this week, and it can blossom into so much more. Our readings for the week are chapters 8 and chapters 9. In chapter 8, we're talking about bias in service delivery, and this really is a great chapter when you look at serving in the field of human services as a professional and how it can become so hectic and so busy, or we have biases that we haven't truly dealt with or understood, and how that can have a great impact on individuals that we serve. So we either don't listen to what is truly needed because of that bias, or we make assumptions, or we move with what we think we know without giving an opportunity to truly hear from that individual and what their needs are. The PowerPoint, so the textbook does a great job of discussing the various biases in delivery, but the PowerPoint also provides great examples of how there could be misdiagnoses and other instances when we're not really taking into consideration things that can hinder us from serving to the best of our ability. So one example here is in case study 1, and Bill, a 26-year-old Navajo man, was hospitalized as psychotic in a mental hospital for 18 months. So that's a year and a half, you guys, diagnosed as schizophrenic, when all it was there wasn't an appropriate use of an interpreter. And so as you continue to read on in this, you'll find that not only was he misdiagnosed, but also misidentified. And never did they recognize that the language barrier was what was keeping them from communicating in a way to give him the services that were needed. So, can you imagine being locked down in a facility that you are diagnosed or misdiagnosed completely based on lack of understanding and interpretation and confusion just because someone took it upon themselves to make an assumption and make a detrimental decision that had such a horrendous impact on this individual. And so I hope that you will take some time and really read through the PowerPoint as well as reading the chapters and aligning in a way to give a better understanding of the concepts and the information that we are addressing in this class. And another piece of pertinent information, as this PowerPoint and this chapter has a lot of great information, but it also talks about being underrepresented. And when we talk about um, our educational system and our professions and how that plays out from education into profession, there's a lot of underrepresentation. And I would like to believe that over the years that is getting better, including myself as a minority, completing my doctorate degree. And so even though when you talk about the highest level of higher education, the percentages being very low, it's also even more so lower for minorities as well. And so as we progress through the years and move into 2020 and a completely different decade, I would like to believe that the numbers are increasing and improving over time, as more and more see the benefit of obtaining that higher education. It also speaks of differences in traditional and Western healing and how we look at that from a Western um, healing approach. Now, very popular, you will hear. So interesting how many of you have probably grown up on myths, right? And these myths of how you take care of things holistically, right? So from spiritual to well-being. And I just think back to that movie, Big Fat Greek Wedding. And do you recall how the Greek father, everything was solved by using the glass cleaner? And every time there was anything wrong, it was, here, just put this glass cleaner on it. And interesting that people believe that and believe that that was healing and in so many different things. I remember my grandmother, you get a burn, put butter on it. Um, so all these myths that you grew up on, not really knowing if there was truth to it, but it's what you believed. And so you followed it because it was a family tradition. Well, interesting, as we moved into Western healing, people relied on medication for everything. And more we're hearing of individuals becoming addicted to prescription medication and really um, moving into, or you have people that are completely against prescriptions or any type of medication and don't do the flu shots and don't believe in getting their kids shots and all that society has told us this is the traditional way that we have to go about healing. And so the textbook really provides great information as far as how it's changed over time and what that traditional looks like from a holistic perspective to what it looks like from using Western medicine and prescriptions and shots and prevention and does that play a difference in by race? So more and more, especially when you talk about um, getting regular checkups and going to the doctor on a regular basis, oftentimes that was taboo. No, you just took whatever home myth that your parents gave you, and that was supposed to solve it. And so, how do you go about addressing um, concerns with health when it's based off of old customs, right? And then some of those biases that come with that, and how that rolls over into biases in regards to the comparison of people of color in comparison to how it's interpreted different when we look at Caucasians or race as a whole. And so I don't want to go into too many details with each of the chapters because I want you to really read through it, and I don't want you to listen to my lecture and think that I've covered the information because I have not. I'm only touching on the peak of it to introduce you to it, and the expectation is that you pick up and make sure that you're reading the full chapters within the textbook as well as reviewing the PowerPoints as well. So chapter 9 moves into um, the mental health aspect. And as I was saying before, looking at the different minority groups, and especially when we talk about mental health, more times than not, that was considered taboo. And so it wasn't talked about, it wasn't addressed. So you will find that individuals were self medicating or living their lives with these reputation of anger and approaching things with anger and violence because not being diagnosed with bipolar or other um, mental health type of concerns. And so this chapter does a really good job of breaking down identity development, um, the the assimilation and accurate acculturation when it comes to us looking at and taking on another culture, gaining entry into institutions of society. Um, when we talk about marital assimilation, where your family might say you are required to marry this individual, and in 2019, moving into 2020, how does that play out? More and more, are we finding individuals that are still abiding by those cultures, or in your opinion, do you see that it's becoming much more diverse? I believe I spoke of it in last week's lecture. They said, or studies have shown, come in the next 10 years, 5 to 10 years, there won't necessarily be one set race because we'll have so many multicultures that there won't be one set race. So the idea of what we're talking about in regards to plan marriages and um, cultures that stick within their culture and really don't um, recognize other entities outside of that. And um, do we play a role into that? So, as an individual, and many of you talked of having strong cultural values that you come from. And with that in mind, in 2019, how does that what does that vision or what does that concept look like for you? So for example, when you talk about implicit biases or having a bias, not even knowing that you have a bias, a way to kind of gauge that is just take a moment to think about your circle of trust. So people that you trust, you interact with on a regular basis, they're your support system. In that circle of trust, what do those individuals look like? Do they all look familiar to you? Are they diverse? Um, do you have different ages? Do you have different cultures? Um, if you do, that's great. If you have a mix and a diverse culture in your circle of trust, that is wonderful. However, if you do not, I would suggest that you start really thinking about what that means. And not to say that you are biased. I'm not saying there's any prejudices, racism. I'm not throwing any of that into this discussion. All I'm saying is, from an implicit bias perspective, I challenge you to really begin to pay attention. Are you comfortable having conversations with people that don't maybe speak the same language as you, that that you're not very familiar with? Even at work, do you take an opportunity to conversate with everybody, even if it's just, hi, how are you? Did you have a wonderful weekend? Or do you stay with your set group? And what does that group look like? And as you're reading through these chapters and the information, really think about, how is that applicable to you? Your family. Does your family only deal with individuals that that they're comfortable with, that look like them, that speak the same language? Or do you have very diverse interactions amongst your family? I had some in your readings and your reflections speak to, you've always had diversity, so it's never been unusual to you because your family has always been open, and that is wonderful. That is something that we could always hope for um, in more families. But also, many of you spoke of your families being very culture based and not really interacting or having much interaction with those outside of your culture until you made it to college or high school, even. And so it was awesome to read in your papers that even though those of you that did have much more of a strict type of culture background, um, you did see that there was more value in being open and more diverse. And as you were introduced to that, you saw the value in that openness. And so that was really nice to see. So I have spoken way too much on both of those chapters, but I think they will bring you great insight and be helpful in this learning journey that we are working through for this next 4 more weeks. We're halfway through. So the discussion for this week is a question that you will answer. How can personal biases affect the assessment and diagnosis of clients? Remember, I was talking about that in the PowerPoints and in your textbook. So there's some valuable information for you to pull from. How do cultural attitudes towards mental health affect potential clients in need of services and treatment? What is an example of a psychological issue that diverse clients struggle with? And you've all been doing a great job on your discussions. Just keep in mind your responses, much more than just good job or wow, I liked what you said. really want to hear some in-depth conversations to get that interaction going, being that we're not in the classroom, we have to really work on engaging each other and learning from each other. This is the rubric that I use for your grading. So if you're not getting full points, it helps you to kind of understand why. But an example in speaking to this question for the discussion that could be helpful to you um, is I work for local government. I shared with you before for San Marino